It's funny how the darkest moments can sometimes reveal the most incredible things about people. Today, we're going to dive into one of history's most profound moments of quiet courage. It's a story that shows us how true character isn't always found in the spotlight, but in the shadows, right when all hope seems to be gone. So, let me start by asking you this. When do all the pieces of a story really, truly click into place? Is it during the big, flashy climax? Or is it sometimes long after you thought the story was completely over? Just keep that question in the back of your mind as we go through this. All right, to really get to the heart of our main story, we're actually going to start with a modern piece of internet slang. I know, sounds weird, but trust me, it's this fascinating concept that perfectly explains how hidden clues in a story can suddenly burst into the light. Okay, the term is tiak bap hui su, and it literally means recovering the bait. Just think about that amazing, satisfying moment in a movie or a book when some tiny, random detail from chapter 1 suddenly becomes the key to the entire plot. That's it. That's the moment all the foreshadowing pays off. You have definitely seen the baiting part of this everywhere, even if you didn't have a name for it. It's basically how a huge chunk of the internet works. For example, you're just scrolling, right? And you see a title just like this one. That's the bait. It plants a question in your head, this little bit of curiosity that makes you just have to click. You're looking for the payoff. You want to recover the bait and find out what on earth this is. The story just isn't complete until you know. And of course, this is all over classic storytelling too. Take a movie like Ben-Hur. There's that early scene where Jesus gives him water when he's at his lowest point. Way later in the film, when Ben-Hur has every reason to want bloody revenge, he chooses forgiveness instead. That first scene was the bait, the foreshadowing, and his final choice is the payoff that makes his whole story make sense. Okay, so now let's take this whole idea of recovering the bait and apply it to one of the most profound universal experiences we all have to face, the end of a person's life. It might sound a little strange to put it this way, but a funeral can be an incredibly powerful moment of tiokko papwesu. You think you know someone's story, right? And you think that story ended when they died. But then you get together with everyone who knew them and you start hearing things you never knew. The story wasn't really over, it's just now being completed. There's this story about a son who grew up thinking his dad was just this angry guy who always got into fights. So the son just left home, never really felt that connection. But then, at the funeral, his father's friends told him a totally different story. They said, "Your dad only ever fought when we told him to stop bragging so much about you." The father had been planting these little seeds, this bait, of his deep pride and love his entire life, but the son only recovered it after he was already gone. And that brings us to our main story today. We're going to look at Holy Saturday, that quiet, heavy day between the crucifixion and the resurrection. It is the ultimate moment of darkness, a day when the story seemed, for all intents and purposes, completely and definitively over. But it was in that silence that some of the most important clues were finally recovered. And the two key figures on that day were Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Now, Joseph was a disciple, but he was so afraid of what people would think that he kept his faith totally secret. And Nicodemus, he was this high-ranking religious leader who only ever dared to visit Jesus under the cover of darkness. Both of these men had been living their faith entirely in the shadows. But on this day, with Jesus dead and all his other followers scattered and terrified, these two men did something absolutely astonishing. The story of their hidden faith was about to get its big payoff. I mean, just think about the risks they were taking here. Joseph goes directly to Pilate, the guy who literally just condemned Jesus to death, to ask for his body. That's like painting a giant target on your own back. By touching a corpse, both men made themselves ritually unclean, which meant they'd be kicked out of the Passover celebration, the most important religious meal of the entire year. They were risking their status, their reputation, everything. They were risking their own lives. And then there was Nicodemus. He shows up with 100 litra, that's about 75 pounds, of myrrh and aloes. This was a massive, incredibly expensive amount of burial spices. I mean, this was the kind of quantity you'd reserve for the burial of a king. He wasn't just doing a sad duty. He was making a loud, public, and very bold statement. And this, right here, this is the whole point. When Jesus was popular, when he was healing people and drawing huge crowds, Joseph was hiding. Nicodemus was sneaking around in the middle of the night. Their true devotion, their true character, wasn't revealed in the light of success. It was revealed in the total darkness of failure, despair, and death. The story of their faith was finally being recovered, right when it mattered most. Now, their actions might have looked like the final chapter, right? A loyal, maybe even foolish gesture to honor a leader who was gone. But what they were actually doing was setting the stage for a totally new story, one that absolutely no one saw coming. See, they placed his body in a new tomb, one where no one had ever been buried before. Now, why does that little detail matter so much? Because it meant that when that tomb was found empty a couple of days later, there could be no confusion, no ambiguity. The emptiness could only mean one thing. This was the ultimate payoff. Their courageous devotion in that moment of absolute despair was the crucial link between the crucifixion and the resurrection. They thought they were just writing an epilogue, but they were actually writing the prologue to the greatest comeback story ever told. So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, true commitment, true character, it doesn't show up when things are easy and everyone's cheering you on. It shows up when everyone else says the story is finished. It's about showing up in the dark when it seems like there is absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Joseph gave his brand new, expensive tomb. Nicodemus gave a king's ransom in spices. They gave their most precious things, not in a moment of triumph, but in a moment of silence and defeat. So the question for us is, when it seems like the story is over, what are we willing to offer?